an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Stone Sky, chapters 1, 2, and prologue. Me when I was I, you in waking and dreaming, and Nassun feels like busting loose. In these chapters, things pick up pretty much right after where the previous book ended, and I'm so excited that I'm getting to read this one so quickly after finishing the previous book. Also, I wish that I didn't understand Nassun's position so completely. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Huge thank you to Denise, who commissioned this episode and the last episode. I really appreciate how close together these wound up being. I didn't check ahead, so I didn't realize that's how it was going to be. And it really, because this book picks up so soon after the previous, I feel like it benefits a lot from being read close together. It's not that there's no, like, quote, recap. I mean, there isn't really a specific recap, but there's a lot of references to what happened in specific enough terms that I wouldn't have been lost or anything had I not had the chance to reread. But it would have been different. It just would have been different. And I really enjoy the fact that this picks up the way that it does, and also that we get to find some more out about Hoa. Now, full disclosure, these opening chapters are still pretty brutal in their way, but I found them to be sort of, I don't know if optimistic is really the word I want. I think it was more like, I feel like I know where we're going now a little bit more, and I don't have a problem with not really knowing where a story is going. I don't need to know all the time. But previously, the other two books, I don't think I was really fully aware of where we were headed in terms of trying to, like, sort of fix everything. I don't think I even considered that to be, like, possible. So I was just sort of reading it as, like, here's a snapshot of a person's life in a system that oppresses them, which is perfectly fine. That's, like, a valid and complete story. But now finding out that there's sort of a greater mission gives me a feeling of purpose as a reader, which is sort of funny because that's almost precisely what Nassun winds up commenting on, that her Stone Eater, Steel, as she calls him, he has given her a sense of purpose that she never had. Even Schaffa has not given her that. He loves her and she needs him, but it's not the same sort of, like, feeling. And I don't think I realized how much a sense of purpose as a reader is important to me. And it sort of makes me feel a little bit childish, like I'm maybe a bit of an immature reader, because I find that I'm liking this a lot and, like, sort of latching onto it. Now that there's a mission, I feel better. And I'm not sure if I'm being fair to myself. That might just be part of the human condition, is that we want to feel like that we are doing something specific and working towards a specific goal. Maybe that's just me personally and the way that I look at things. I mean, a few months ago, I covered Watership Down with Rashawn for the Unspoiled Book Club. Forgive me. I have this cup of tea that didn't cool enough until I started recording, of course. And I'll be damned if I let this damn cup of tea go to waste. But we covered this together, and I realized that while Watership Down does have a mission, they're, like, looking for a new place to live, they didn't have any place in mind. They were just sort of wandering until they found a place that felt okay. And it was hard for me to, like, get into the story because I kept waiting for there to, like, it wasn't like Lord of the Rings, for example, which is another book with a lot of meandering stories, because at least you're headed for Mount Doom. There's a specific destination. That's where you're going. And everything that happens in the meantime, you accept as the obstacles along the way to getting to this very specific place. Whereas Watership Down, there's all these obstacles in the way of getting to a place that you still don't even know about. There's a lot of holdups, and there is no particular goal either, which felt really frustrating to me as a reader. So I'm starting off this book now that I know what each of these people, I was tempted to say women, but Nassun does not count as a woman. Now that I know what each of these people is going to be working towards, now that I know that they're related and that they're going to be at odds with one another, I feel a sense of focus on this story that I didn't before. And I don't mean a sense of focus in the story. I mean me as a reader. I feel more focused as I read than I did before. So I just wanted to mention that my reading experience has shifted a little bit. All right, let's talk about the prologue. Me when I was I, and this is Hoa talking. And I don't know how many of you sort of like assumed that this was Hoa when you read this prologue. I thought it might be, and then I left off of it being, and then I came back and thought it was again, and I kind of went back and forth for a minute. But he's talking about his memories and the fact that like so much of what he looks back on feel like they are part of some other person's life, that he knows that they happen to him, and it's not like they're so distant from him that it's like he doesn't remember them at all, or that there's no connection at all, but it feels like a different version of himself, like there was a copy. And I completely get that. I mean, that happens to me, and I'm only 35 years old, and Hoa's thousands of years old, right? So I feel like that's got to get worse and worse as you get older. That's bound to happen. So he's talking about how far back his history goes, and it's before the land has even formed into the stillness, which is the continent that we all know. Repeated seasons will eventually create more ice at the poles, sinking the sea and making your Arctics and Antarctics larger and colder. Now, in this time before the stillness, the far north and south are decent farmland. What you think of as the western coastals is mostly wetland and rainforest. Those will die out in the next millennium. Some of the nomadlats don't yet exist, and will be created by volcanic effusion over several thousand years of eruptive pulses. The land that becomes Palela, your hometown, doesn't exist. Not so much change, all things considered, but then now is nothing ago, tectonically speaking. When we say that the world has ended, remember it is usually a lie. The planet is just fine. What do we call this lost world, this now, if not the stillness? Let me tell you first of a city. It is a city built wrong by your standards. This city sprawls in a way that no modern comm would be permitted to do, since that would require too many miles of walls. And this city's outermost sprawls have branched off along rivers and other lifelines to spawn additional cities, much in the manner of mold forking and stretching along those rich veins of a growth medium. Too close together, you would think. Too much overlap of territory. They are too connected, these sprawling cities and their snaking spawn, each unable to survive should it be cut off from the rest. And he continues to describe this city and how alien it looks and how huge it is. And because of the hugeness of it, which is not really permitted in the climate that they live in now, how powerful these cities become because they have so many people living in them, and they are able to persist for so long uninterrupted that they can have technology, and there's just a lot that's possible when you're able to really settle. The people of Sil-Anagist have mastered the forces of matter and its composition. They have shaped life itself to fit their whims. They have so explored the mysteries of the sky that they've grown bored with it and turned their attention back toward the ground beneath their feet. and still Anna just lives on, oh, how it lives, in bustling streets and ceaseless commerce and buildings that your mind would struggle to define as such. The buildings have walls of patterned cellulose that can barely be seen beneath leaves, moss, grasses, and clusters of fruit or tubers. Some rooftops fly banners that are actually immense, unfurled fungus flowers. The streets teem with things you might not recognize as vehicles except in that they travel and convey. Some crawl on legs like massive arthropods. Some are little more than open platforms that glide on a cushion of resonant potential. But you would not understand this. Let me only say that these vehicles float a few inches off the ground. No animals draw them. No steam or chemical fuels them. Should something, a pet or child perhaps, pass underneath, it will temporarily cease to exist and resume on the other side with no interruption of velocity or awareness. No one thinks of this as death. Let's talk about that last sentence here for a second, shall we? No one thinks of this as death. I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't thinking of it as death until that sentence was uttered. And then I was like, wait, is it then? Wait, why do you feel the need to make that distinction? I feel very sort of suspicious of the wording there. And I don't know if that's anything or if it's meant to just sort of make me stop and go, wait, what's this? And I don't know if there will be any explanation or further exploration of that later, but I really do need to mention it because I stopped and stared at the sentence and reread it a couple of times and then went back and reread that full paragraph because I was just like, this makes me deeply uncomfortable. So it turns out that in the center of the city is the amethyst obelisk. It's not floating. It's sitting in a socket, and it pulses in a way that he says that will be familiar to you from Alia. This is a healthier pulse than that was. The amethyst is not the damaged, dying garnet. Still, if the similarity makes you shiver, that's not an unhealthy reaction. So that's an interesting sort of... Foreshadowing might not be the right word. I feel like it is, but I don't know that for sure, so I hesitate to say it. But I do like the fact that it's sort of pointing out that, like, this thing is functioning precisely correctly. It's functioning the exact way that it is supposed to function. If that makes you uncomfortable, that might not be incorrect. And it makes me think of the, like, sort of like a nuclear power concept, you know? Nuclear power can function precisely the way that it's meant to function, and it still makes me uncomfortable. I mean, it's one of those things that a lot of people talk about, the cleanliness of nuclear power and the overall efficiency of it. And in some ways that may be true, but there is still a part of me, maybe superstitious or ignorant, call it what you will, that feels like it is not something that we should be trusting implicitly. And that's sort of the vibe that I'm getting from this. So he says all over the three lands, wherever there is a large enough node of Sil Anagist, an obelisk sits at the center of each. They dot the face of the world, 256 spiders in 256 webs, feeding each city and being fed in turn. Webs of life, if you want to think of them that way. Life, you see, is sacred in Sil Anagist. Now, when he says being fed in turn, I would love to know what the fuck that means, because I really am not totally sure about that. I just feel like it's a life, like the life force of the origins are what's sort of keeping it going, is that, like, my assumption here. But because this is so far back, I'm not even totally sure that origins were a thing in this era. So the fact that Hoa is telling this story, and Hoa is like a stone eater, a stone person, is he what's keeping it fed? Is like his his life force, his existence, what's doing this? I don't know. So then he starts talking about surrounding the base of the amethyst, a hexagonal complex of buildings. There are no bars on the building's crystal windows, and there's a lot of description of the fact that this building is really beautiful. It's meant to keep people out, not keep them in. They sting but don't kill because life is so sacred. And then it says, inside there are no guards on the doors. Guards are inefficient in any case. The fulcrum is not the first institution to have learned an eternal truth of humankind. No need for guards when you can convince people to collaborate in their own internment. Here is a cell within the pretty prison. It doesn't look like one, I know. There's a beautifully sculpted piece of furniture that you might call a couch, though it has no back and consists of several pieces arranged in clusters. And so then comes a full description of this room and this boy, who is very white. Everything about him, his eyes, his hair, his skin, and the room is also white. Yes, the boy is me. I don't truly remember his name, but I do remember that it had too many rusting letters. Let us therefore call him Hoa. The same sound, just padded with all manner of silent letters and hidden meanings. That's close enough, and appropriately symbolic of, oh, I am angrier than I should be. Fascinating. Let's change tracks into something less fraught. Let us return to the now that will be, and a far different here. Dude, no, let's not. I want to know what the fuck is happening right there, Hoa. What are you doing to me? Honestly, this is rude as hell. Like, how are you going to start this off this way? How are you going to be like, hey, check this out. This world that existed before anything that you know of, this city that nobody is aware of, that was enormous and sprawling and powered with technologies you could only dream of. Let's talk about the fact that I was imprisoned there as a child. And then let's move on and just totally ignore this and go somewhere else with it. What? Why would you do that? It's so mean. Y'all, I am so angry. I want to, but I'm assuming, correctly or not, this is what my guess is right now, that Hoa being kept in this octagonal facility is him sort of feeding this crystal. And that he, like when it says they participate in their own internment or make them complicit, that somehow society has convinced people of this type that this is where they will help the most and where they belong. Maybe convince them that they are dangerous if they are out somewhere else. I don't know. But I am absolutely dying to find out more about this, and it's killing me, guys. It really is. Like, So, here comes the section that I highlighted and then posted on the Facebooks because it was too good. I know what matters here at the world's end. Ah, my love, an apocalypse is a relative thing, isn't it? When the earth shatters, it is a disaster to the life that depends on it, but nothing much to Father Earth. When a man dies, it should be devastating to a girl who once called him father, but this becomes as nothing when she has been called monster so many times that she finally embraces the label. When a slave rebels, it is nothing much to the people who read about it later, just thin words on thinner paper, worn finer by the friction of history. So you were slaves, so what? They whisper, like it's nothing. But to the people who live through a slave rebellion, both those who take their dominance for granted until it comes for them in the dark, and those who would see the world burn before enduring one moment longer in their place, that is not a metaphor, Essun, not hyperbole. I did watch the world burn. Say nothing to me of innocent bystanders, unearned suffering, heartless vengeance. When a comm builds atop a fault line, do you blame its walls when they inevitably crash the people inside? No, you blame whoever was stupid enough to think they could defy the laws of nature forever. Well, some worlds are built on a fault line of pain, held up by nightmares. Don't lament when those worlds fall. Rage that they were built doomed in the first place. Woo! Lord, can I get an amen if that isn't the realest shit? Lord have mercy. Ugh, get fucking covered in goosebumps reading that. Y'all, this is the shit that I come up against when I think about our country and I just don't know what's supposed to be done about it, is the thing. Like, I can admit our country was built wrong. Our country was created by colonizers who swept in, murdered the native people, stole the land, forced their beliefs on others at the point of a sword or barrel of a gun, and basically killed and raped their way into dominance, and then continued to enslave and rape their way into financial success and stability. And we are supposed to be proud of this and want to continue this legacy somehow. Like, as Americans, we are meant to uphold the tenets of a country that was started this way and operated this way for 300 years. Like, we really try and pretend that slavery was so long ago. And guys, slavery was 3/4 of our existence as a country. That's the way that I look at it. You know, it's not how long ago it was, which, by the way, what, 150 years? That's really not that long, actually. That's shockingly recent. But then, when you set aside the fact that slavery, when it ended, did not actually end, then we can talk about all of the ways in which Black people were taken advantage of, murdered, raped, enslaved in other name for, you know, another 100 years, right up until today, considering the prison system. So, you know, there are people alive who were not allowed to sit at certain tables, and were not allowed to drink out of certain water fountains, and were not allowed to go to certain schools. They are still alive today. And we just act like that's not true. It's really insane. We just walk around like that's not our actual legacy. Like that's not shit you could just go talk to a person about. A person who is alive right now, you could go and speak to about their experience. We behave as if this is all in the foggy mists of time. It's insanity. It really is. Like, I use that word purposefully. Choosing to take 3/4 of our history and behave as if it didn't happen, and behave as if anyone who talks about it is somehow inciting division, that being held in one part of someone's mind, and then in the other part of their mind they are still holding a need for patriotism and nationalism, those things can't work together. They don't work. But yet that's what the majority of our country seems to operate with, are those two things that are in complete conflict with each other. One is respect our history, respect our country, and the other one is but ignore our history and ignore the truth about our country. And those they fucking put them together, make a sandwich, and that's how I live. I don't get it. I don't understand how you can live in such total denial about the reality of where everything you claim to love comes from and how it was made. And it's sort of like on the same... I was talking about this on the Harry Potter episode that I recorded with Rashawn last night. there is this whole thing with Dumbledore and his history coming up after he has died. And one of his friends, Elphias Doge, is like telling Harry to not sully the memory that he has of Dumbledore, to keep the memories intact. Basically, he is asking Harry, he's not telling him, here's what actually happened, it's up to you. He won't tell him the truth and tells him to not worry about it, to simply focus on the positive. And this is an attitude that we take about so much. Human beings and denial are absolutely a fucking synonym. It's really remarkable the way that we can force ourselves to like forget anything that we don't want to know about. And then when we are reminded of it, sometimes we react with genuine surprise, as if we didn't fucking know. You know, and like there's this real, the delusion goes so deep that it is far beyond just, I don't want to think about it. It goes so far as to be like, I genuinely have forgotten, and this means nothing to me until you lay it all out on the table, asking for emotional labor, essentially. I don't understand how people live like this. Like, there is, for me, such dissonance when I try and do this, and such guilt and this gross feeling of almost like I feel like I am complicit, which I am. That's fucking the point. And I can't live that way. And I don't understand how so many people are able to do that and be okay with it and not feel like absolute enabling garbage when they do it. You know, it's just what, yesterday or the day before, Harvey Weinstein went to some fucking event where they were like, it was like a showcase for new actors and actresses. This man is like on trial for rape and assault. And he's sitting at this event with young actresses who are the fucking group that he had targeted. And somebody had the nerve to say something about him being there and how inappropriate it was and how disgusting it was that there were people supporting him being here. And that person got kicked out of the event. What? That person, Harvey Weinstein, admitted rapist, assaulter, harasser, overall garbage, piece of shit human being, is fine at this table, surrounded by people who are all just like, the past is the past. And this one person who dares to say shit about it gets fucking kicked out at their showcase that they are one of the young new talents. That's supposed to be what it's for, and they are the one removed. This is just how we function, and no wonder we're so screwed. There is nothing to be learned if we keep doing this. People talk about learning from their mistakes, and they behave as if that means forgetting the mistakes happened. How can you learn if you pretend they didn't happen? You can't do it. That's not how learning works, you jags. So, then we get, I will tell you how I opened the gate and flung away the moon and smiled as I did it. And I'm like, word? Wait, what? Hoen's the one who threw the fucking moon away? I did not see that coming. I got to admit, maybe I should have, but I didn't. And I'm extremely interested to find out just how that went down. Because how mad do you got to be before you hook onto the moon and just decide to toss it? I feel like you got to be big mad. So, Tony's here. Hi, Tony. Tony says we are incredibly skilled at self-deception. It is true. Evia is in the chat. Hi, Evia. I love how the series has so many twists like that just thrown out offhand. Yeah. He's like, oh, yeah, after I've done this, eventually I'll tell you how I threw the moon away. But back to this other thing. He keeps doing that. He keeps being like, here's this incredibly interesting revelation. Oh, but don't you want some more wine? Do you want to change the channel? I don't like this show. Oh, stay on topic, please. You're killing me. All right, so then we go to chapter 1, You in Waking and Dreaming. So we are back with Essun. And it's, of course, written in the you, second person present. And it is really sad because I have to be honest, y'all. I really didn't expect anybody to be mad at Essun. And I'm about to take a sip of tea here because I want you all to let that sink in that I really didn't think anybody was going to be mad at her for fucking destroying the entire comm that they were living in. But I didn't, because here's why. We have the other empty spot for all of us to go to. So I assumed that everybody would be like, well, it sucks that this is dead, but we do have this other dope place that's huge and probably filled with supplies that's just literally sitting there waiting for us. It didn't really enter my head that nobody necessarily knows that it is waiting, because Hoa is talking to Lerna at the end of the last book about that facility being available now. And those are the only people that know this, and Lerna only knows secondhand. He isn't totally sure. So nobody, as they're leaving this community, is very confident that they actually have anywhere to go. And I just didn't take that into account at all. I thought Lerna was going to tell everybody, basically, lie. I thought he was going to be like, I talked to her right before she passed out, and this other comm is open and ready and waiting for us. And when he talks to Essun later, he points out that all of the boil bugs living up right above the comm was going to mean huge competition for meat in the first place. So there was no way that they were going to be able to stay where they were. But it's too logical a look at things, and nobody is feeling particularly logical right now. I do have to wonder, though, because people keep, because he mentions these boil bugs. And, guys, she was able to shift them by using her originy. Isn't that something they could do again? To, force all of the boil bugs into another direction and get them away again? Because they sort of behave as if her bringing them in to do this attack, that was going to be the one move that she was able to make, and then that she wouldn't be able to undo it again. And I don't really understand how that works. And I'm also really curious about how they're traveling with all of the boil bugs around, because they came straight for Essun the second that she was outside. And she just managed to avoid getting hit with one because Hoa snatches it, and then she makes a protective torus around herself. So I don't know if maybe they're traveling with other origins who are creating a torus while they travel. I'm not sure how that works. But it's weird to me that they all sort of act as if those boil bugs are here to stay now and that we can't possibly undo the damage. And I don't really understand. But nevertheless, so sometimes you dream of undoing it all, not flailing for the garnet obelisk in Alia, and instead watching happy black children play in the surf of a black sand beach while you bled out around a guardian's black knife. Not being taken to Mayav by antimony. Instead, you would have returned to the fulcrum to give birth to Corundum. You'd have lost him after that birth, and you would never had Anon, but both of them would probably still be alive. Well, for values of alive, if they'd put Karu in a node. But then you would never have lived in Terimo, never have borne Uche to die beneath his father's fists, never have raised Nassun to be stolen by her father, never have crushed your once neighbors when they tried to kill you. So many lives saved if only you had stayed in your cage or died on demand. And here, now, long free from the ordered, stead structures of the fulcrum, you have become mighty. You saved the community of Castrima at the cost of Castrima itself. This was a small price to pay compared to the cost in blood that the enemy army would have extracted if they'd won. You achieved victory by unleashing the... Here's a word, guys. Concatenated power. I think that's how you say that. Concatenated power of an arcane mechanism older than your written history, because you are who you are. And I don't know if you all have ever run across this word, but I never have. I gotta say, this book is one of the first books that frequently uses vocabulary that I'm not familiar with. It happens here and there, and a lot of it is wording like that. All it means when I looked it up is just connected. But so there's no, you could just say connected and be fine. But I sort of enjoy the use of these weird words here and there that feel sort of antiquated and make it feel like another world just a tiny bit. I don't know if you guys can hear this dog, but I think he can hear me talking because he keeps running up. It's my neighbor's dog. He keeps running up to like my fence and looking around. And I think that it's like he's trying to figure out where the sound of this voice is coming from. So forgive me for this like barking in the background. So here comes the truth about the situation, is that Essun, despite the fact that she is supposed to catch the moon, she is supposed to fix the, seasons, all of this, the truth is she doesn't really care. She's going to do it like eventually. She'll get to it. But really right now, she wants to find Nassun. That's the thing that she really cares about. She has felt that Nassun exists. She has sensed like where she is and is determined to find her. And that is the thing that she is like focused on here. You're not really in a coma. You are a key component of a complex system, the whole of which has just experienced a massive, poorly controlled startup flux and emergency shutoff with insufficient cooldown time, expressing itself as arcanochemical phase state resistance and mutagenic feedback. Guys, I don't even know. I'm not even touching that. So, it doesn't matter. So, Essun is in and out of this sort of vague consciousness dream, half awake state. And finally, after like some days, begins to sink into a real sleep again. It's almost like she can't possibly do that until she has settled down again. And finally, when she does awake and opens her eyes, she sees the sky. And it turns out that she is on a stretcher being carried, and that they are heading out from Castrima to wherever the fuck. Like, we know where they're actually going, but these people aren't sure that there is any place for them out there. Jarka is the first one to notice that she's awake. And Lerna is here. And Lerna is checking in on how Essun is doing, making sure that like she's not feverish, that her eyes are working okay, that she doesn't have some sort of lasting damage. And when Essun tries to move, she feels this horrible like yanking on her shoulder. And this, it turns out, is her arm, which has turned to almost like a sandstone. I was a little bit disappointed. I was hoping that her arm would turn into some like really wild stone, like, I don't know, some kind of like clear quartz, something that was like cool looking. But it's just like fucking boring ass sandstone. And Essun has not realized that this has happened to her. I was kind of thinking that maybe coming in and out of consciousness that she would have sussed it a little, but she doesn't. It's not until she wakes up that she has any clue. And it's not as if, oh, I just have a stone arm and it's like my other arm, but stone, whatever. I can still move it around. No, this thing behaves like your arm would if somebody tied a rope around your forearm and then hung a 20-pound weight off it. So she can't move easily. The tendons are getting like strained from the weight. She's got stretch marks on her shoulder from it being pulled. And basically what it comes down to is that this shit needs to go. And there's a variety of ways in which this can work. But the one that's at the top of everyone's minds is that Hoa wants to eat it. Which leads to a weirdly sexual scene between her and Hoa, where he eats her arm, and it's very like she's about to like lose her virginity, and he's like, "Are you scared? Are you all right? I'll try and be gentle with you." And then fucking opens his mouth, and she's just like feeling his like stone hands against her stone arm, and then sort of realizing like it feels weirdly sensual, but then realizes she can't actually feel anything. Weird scene. But really, when it comes down to it, because Lerna's just like, I'm going to cut your arm off. And she's like, I just let Hoa eat it. It's fine. And Lerna makes this face. And she realizes how like totally repulsed he is by the idea of this. And let's see here. Oh, Tonki comes and assesses her as well and comes to the same conclusion as Lerna. And Lerna is very irritated because Tonki just loves to do this, which I find so funny. I love Tonki's she's a mansplainer. She's a woman mansplainer. So here's one of the things that really hurt. There's one speaking loudly, calling for everyone to pack up. Break's over. They need to do another 5 miles before dark. Ika. You lift your head as she gets close enough, and it's in this moment that you realize you think of her as a friend. You realize it because it feels good to hear her voice and to see her resolve out of the swirling ash. Last time you saw her, she was in serious danger of being murdered by hostile stone eaters attacking Castrima Under. That's one of the reasons you fought back, using the crystals of Castrima Under to ensnare the attackers. You wanted her and all the other origins of Castrima, and by extension all the people of Castrima who depended on those origins, to live. So you smile. It's weak. You're weak. Which is why it actually hurts when Ika turns to you and her lips tighten in what is unmistakably disgust. Yikes. Like, again, maybe I should have seen this coming, but I just didn't. I really thought that Ika would be able to understand what Essun was doing. She's like, I would expect this from a fucking still. But Ika's an origin, you know, like, I don't know. I thought better of her. And maybe she'll come around eventually. Lerna says that he thinks that she will because he was able to after Terimo. But I just wasn't ready for it, and I feel bad about it. And I feel really bad for Essun because all she fucking tries to do is her best. And all it results in is things getting destroyed, and like that's not exactly her fault. It's her fault in that she kicks off whatever events lead to the demise of these areas, but she keeps being fucking put in these insane positions. It's, you know, I feel really, I just hope that this gets resolved. So she's a little pissed about you destroying the geode. You flinch. Destroying? Oh, but locking all those stone eaters into the crystals. You meant to save everyone, but Castrima was a machine. A very old, very delicate machine that you didn't understand, and now you're topside traipsing through the ashfall. Oh, rusting earth, I did. What, you didn't realize? Jarka laughs a little. It's got a bitter edge. You actually thought we were all up here topside, the whole rusting comm traveling north in the ash and cold for fun? She strides away, shaking her head. Ika's not the only one pissed about it. Yeah, there it is. So this is when he tells her that, Lerna tells her that there was no way that they were going to be able to make it staying in Castrima under anyway. And at one point, Tunki, when Essun says, I have to go find Nassun, Tunki tells her to shut the fuck up unless you want to be dumped on the side of the road. Well, damn. So they stop and they make camp. And this is when Hoa shows up. And she talks to him about being an ally. He says, I think Yika prefers her stone eaters as silent menaces rather than active allies. Are you an ally, Hoa? Not to them. Yika understands that too, though. Yes, this is probably why you're still alive. As long as Yika kept you safe and fed, Hoa will help. You're back on the road, and everything's a rusting transaction again. The comm that was Castrima lives, but it isn't really a community anymore, just a group of like-minded travelers collaborating to survive. Maybe it can become a true comm again later once it's got another home to defend, but for now you get why Yika's angry. Something beautiful and wholesome has been lost. Well, you look down at yourself. You're not wholesome anymore, but what's left of you can be strengthened. You'll be able to go after Nassun soon. So then we proceed to the scene in which Hoa eats her arm, and he clarifies that eating her arm is not sustenance. He says we need only life to live. The latter half of that was nonsensical, so you latch on to the former half. If it isn't sustenance, then... And he doesn't answer her. So we saw an alabaster statue person. Is this a transformational thing? I don't know. But yeah, so we move on to chapter 2. And Nassun feels like busting loose, which really does pick up immediately after the last one ended. She is literally still standing over her father's body at this point. And the stabbing that he inflicted on her is causing her to sort of sway and be lightheaded from blood loss. And Schaffa is standing there staring. And this, it says, she needs Schaffa's love too. Oh, how she needs it. But in this moment, when her heart has been most thoroughly broken, when her thoughts are at their least focused, she craves something more solid. She will have the solidity that she wants. She will fight for it and kill for it because she's had to do that again and again, and it's a habit now. And if she's successful, she will die for it. After all, she is her mother's daughter, and only people who think they have a future fear death. In Nassun's good hand thrums a 3-foot-long tapering shard of crystal, deep blue and finely faceted, though with some slight deformations near its base that have resulted in something like a hilt. Now, it wasn't until reading this that I realized this book series is low-key like a really dark version of Steven Universe, where everybody has like a gem that they get power from. Like, not everybody, but like some people. And it just has a lot more of like, you know, sort of brutal results. But yeah, there's something about like this actual obelisk transforming into a sapphire sword that just feels really like, and because it's so outside of anything else that's happened in terms of like, you know, we have the spinel that spun around behind Essun, but this is the first time that it's really like turned into a whole other thing. It just really caught me off guard. I think you guys remember the last episode when I was like reading what happened. I wasn't even confident that I understood that properly. But according to y'all, you thought the same thing. And then here it's just said. So yeah, this thing like has the ability to flicker in and out of reality and to flicker in and out of other sizes and shapes, which just, I don't know how that works, but it's magic, so okay, sure. And there's an interesting line. Now and again, the strange long knife flickers into a translucent, intangible, debatably real state. It's very real. Only Nassun's attention keeps the thing in her hands from turning her to colored stone the way it did her father. Which, that's fucking really scary and not something that I ever even considered. That this thing is like, this is what turned her father into the thing. I thought she did it because she managed to do it to that other kid without having any sort of weapon on her. But it's being treated as almost like, what's the word I want? It's almost like it's a nexus of her power in her hand. Does that make sense? But like, so I kept thinking of it as like something to focus her. But then when it's treated like this, and it's said that she could be turned into this if she isn't careful about how she handles it, it made me reevaluate that. So I'm still not totally sure how that works. So she looks over and she sees Umber and Nita, the other two guardians. And this is really, really interesting. Beneath each guardian, delicate silvery tethers wend up from the ground into their feet, connected by the nerve and vein glimmer of their bodies to tiny shards of iron embedded in their brains. These taproot-like tethers have always been there, but maybe it's the tension of the moment that makes Nassun finally notice how thick those lines of light are for each guardian, much thicker than the one linking the ground to Schaffa. And at last she understands what that means. Umber and Nita are just puppets of a greater will. Nassun has tried to believe better of them, that they are their own people. But here, now, with the sapphire in her hands and her father dead at her feet, some maturations cannot wait for a more convenient season. So Nassun roots a torus deep within the earth because she knows that Umber and Nita will sense this. It's a feint. She doesn't need the power of the earth, and she suspects they know it. Still, they react, Umber unfolding his arms and Nita straightening from where she's been leaning on the porch railing. Schaffa reacts too, his eyes shifting sideways to meet hers. It's an unavoidable tell that Umber and Nita will notice, but it cannot be helped. Nassun has no piece of the evil earth lodged in her brain to facilitate communication. Where matter fails, care makes do. He says, Nita, and that's all she needs. So, Schaffa is over here, and he takes on Umber and leaves her only Nita to deal with. And here comes one of my favorite things. She cannot contest them in the physical sphere of battle, and besides, she can barely stand. Will and the silver are all she's got left. So Nassun, her body still, her mind violent, snatches at the silver threads of the air around her, weaving them into a crude but efficient net. She's never done this before, but no one has ever told her that it can't be done. Y'all, I can't tell you how much that line almost made me cry. I miss that. I miss doing shit simply because that is what I thought to do, and not ever even considering whether people say it's possible or not. I mean, I used to be that way. Being a kid, you often are that way. And I feel like I've lost touch so completely with that now. It's not really fair. Honestly, the way that I'm making a living proves that that's not true. Like, I somehow turned a hobby podcast into a full-time job. And so an element of that is just nobody ever said that I couldn't do it. So in some ways, but you know, like there's some ways like this that are much more creative that I'm like, oh, I am limited. Being an adult really changes your imagination. So she catches up the Guardian in this for a second, but she is really taken aback by the fact that this shit should have brought her to a complete halt. And instead, Nita has threads of something else come out from inside her and lash the air and shred the net and continue on. And Nassun is just absolutely fucking floored. Like, she is not ready with a second attack because it didn't even occur to her that she was going to need one. She did not think Nita was going to be able to get out of this as easily. She bulls forward and, oh my God, Nassun snatches stone up from within the earth to spear Nita's feet. This impedes Nita only a little. She bulls forward, breaking the rock shards off and charging with them still jutting through her boots. One of her hands is held like a claw, the other a flat, finger-stiffened blade. Whichever of them reaches Nassun first will dictate how she begins tearing Nassun apart with her bare hands. Guys, that's real scary, okay? Like, I did not like this at all. And this moment is really interesting because as she's running towards Nassun can sense some sort of weird, chaotic, reverberating power coming off of Nita. And it is utterly terrifying to her, even though it's totally unfamiliar and she doesn't know what it does. But something in her is just like, that's bad news. And we know that if Nassun were to be grabbed up by Nita, she'd be able to shake her apart. Her literal matter would separate into a cloud. So yeah, she should be scared. But I find it really interesting that she could sense that power coming at her. And I don't know if Essun was able to do this, if she sensed it before it happened, or if it was just the watching it happen. Like, what I mean by this is, I don't know if Essun sensing this is part of her heightened ability that she has now after tapping into the magic, or if it's if it's something that Essun experienced way back when as well, and I just don't remember it, or she just didn't talk about it much. So she's got this knife, the sapphire sword thing, and she is going to try and defend herself with it, but Nita is in the middle of laughing already because she just knows Nassun is not going to be able to be fast enough. And here steps in Steel. He just inserts himself right beside Nassun and grabs Nita by the fucking throat. And there is a real weird moment here. Schaffa and Umber are still over here fighting. And there's a really creepy moment where Umber is beaten. Like, Schaffa is, has, like, shoved his hand up through Umber's jaw, I think. But Umber continues, like, making sounds and trying to grab at Schaffa like he's a fucking zombie. And this is when Nassun starts to realize that when it comes to her assessment of them being sort of puppets earlier, she underestimated just how true that was. Their bodies do not even need to have the original occupants inside anymore for them to continue to work. So Schaffa is forced to really destroy Umber much more thoroughly than he had intended to, because that's the only way to get him to stop fucking moving. And then Nita is over here, and she's like choking, and Nassun says to her, "I don't want to kill you." Nita abruptly goes still and silent. The fury in her expression gradually fades to no expression at all. "It did what it had to do last time," she says. Nassun's skin prickles with the realization that something intangible has changed. She's not sure what, but she doesn't think this is quite Nita anymore. She swallows. Did what? Who? Nita's gaze falls on Steel. There's a faint grinding sound as Steel's mouth curves into a wide, toothy smile. Then, before Nassun can think of another question to ask, Steel's grip shifts, not loosening, turning with that unnaturally slow motion which perhaps is meant to imitate human movement or mock it. He draws in his arm and pivots his wrist to turn Nita around, her back to his front, the nape of her neck to his mouth. "It's angry," Nita continues calmly, though now she faces away from both Steel and Nassun. Yet even now it may be willing to compromise, to forgive. It demands justice, but it has had its justice 1,000 times over, says Steele. I owe it no more. Then he opens his mouth wide. So, I don't know what the fuck that is. I am assuming when she says it's angry, she means the earth. And I don't know what the justice is that it's demanding, if it's like getting the moon back. But Steele is evidently not interested in this conversation, and he just eats her, or at least kills her. He does a vampire bite. So at this point, Nassun turns around and notices that all of the other Origin children are outside, because that clap of thunder when she made the sapphire obelisk into a sword woke them all up, and they've been like watching this horrific fight. And Schaffa says something about, we cannot remain here, others will come. She knows what he's saying is basically, if we want to escape, I should just kill them, because if we leave them unprotected and no guardians to look after them, everyone else is probably going to kill them anyway. Like, the only people who were okay with this the only reason people were okay with this was because there were guardians looking after them, and it felt like a fulcrum because of that. It felt safe. If that's not how this is operating anymore, they're not going to let it continue. And Nassun tells him no and says, I can't take any more. And she feels like a complete fraud saying that, because she's saying, I can't take any more, with the full intention of yanking the moon into the earth and destroying it all. She's like going to commit genocide. Isn't even the word for it. What's the word for planeticide? I don't know. But she feels like a total shit saying it. But like, it's a very different thing to just bring on Armageddon in this abstract sense, and to watch friends who are your age be slaughtered by somebody who loves you. Like, I'm not mad at you, Nassun. You're pretty hard on yourself. And Schaffa watches her for a second, and she realizes that there is this like force coming over him that is really telling him to kill her, and that he is fighting it with everything that he has got. And he patches her up, ties a bandage around her arm where her knife wound is. And he has the shard of metal that had been in Umber's neck, and winds up handing it over to Steele, who like just grabs it, squeezes his hand, opens his hand, and it's gone. And I'm very, very curious what the fuck happened to it. And Schaffa finally agrees that he will go inside and help all of the kids prepare travel packs. And Nassun feels like she knows where they need to go. And she tells him that it's a really, really long way. I don't know if this is what I think, but I'm guessing it's where the original like lost city is that she has to go, but I don't know that. And he asks, when she says, I know where we need to go, it's a really long way, will you go with me? He says, anywhere, little one. So then we get a brief historical record of an Origin female who opened a pocket of gas near a town and suffocated and killed a lot of people. And another female Origin who stopped the first one. Guys, Amman citizens shot both as soon as possible to prevent future incidents. Gas pockets assessed by Fulcrum as substantial, enough to have killed most people and livestock in western Nomad-Lots with follow-up topsoil contamination. Initiating female age 17, reacting to reported molester of younger sister. Quelling female age 7, sister of the first. Yikes! Just so many stories like this of like, yeah, they did something horrific because something horrific was done to them. Was their reaction out of proportion? Maybe. I'm not mad at it. Like, I'm not mad at it. I'm just saying there really does come a point where I feel like everybody knows. Like this is the assumption I'm going on here, is that this 17-year-old girl found out somebody was molesting her 7-year-old sister. And they found out that like everybody knew about it too. And so she was just like, oh, okay, fuck y'all. And decides to take them all out. And the sister, being molested, tries to stop her and then gets killed for her trouble too. This feels very true. There are just some stories that you're like, yep, that's how that'd go. So with that cheery note, I'm over time. I'm going to have to let you all go. Thank you very much to Denise for commissioning this. I appreciate it so much. I'm not sure how many more episodes of this are commissioned yet, but you guys can check that. If you join the Facebook group for Spoil Me, there is a link to the spreadsheet up top. And if you're interested in commissioning another one, you can do that at unspoiledpodcast.com/shop. Thank you very much to Evia and to Tony for hanging out with me in the chat. I appreciate you. And this book is really good, and I'm really afraid of what's about to happen. All right, guys, let's see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.